Hey everybody, I'm going to be doing a tutorial on DCS Liberation as of May 11th, 2022. The latest build is the 6.0 preview, 3841, and I've got it loaded up here. I'm going to show you start to finish, new game, how I plan things, and then I'll go into a couple other details about factions and campaigns. So when you go up here and you click File New, you get the new game wizard. You pick any campaign that's available. There's also a bunch that say incompatible, and the only difference between the compatible ones and the incompatible ones is that the mission creator hasn't double checked to make sure that it's up to the latest version that Liberation's at. So you can pick one, and we're going to pick Nevada here. And it's very important to read through. A lot of times it's just a scenario based description, but some missions do have extra tips or tricks or things about their mission that make it interesting. The performance impact, this is also set by the campaign designer to give you an idea of if it's going to be hard to run or not. So this one says it's going to be 1 out of 3, so it says it needs a very good computer to run, but it shouldn't be that horrible. And I've played it on my own solo, and it's not that bad. Invert map will switch the default layout of the map. It'll reverse red and blue. Not all campaigns support that, and you might get mixed results. Usually it's best to just play the campaign the way it was designed, unless somebody says that they built it to go for the invert. The advanced IADS is also set by the campaign designer. They can choose for Skynet to have all the extra features that the IAD system has, so power, communications, things like that. The time period preset, you can use this to restrict weapons by date. I don't particularly use that feature, but if you wanted to have older weapons in your game instead of modern stuff, you could do it that way. And there's another setting to make that happen later on. Once you're satisfied with this, you hit next. The default factions will show up that the campaign designer wants you to play it as. You can switch these out. You just might have to do a little bit of tweaking later on, and we'll show you that as well. The campaign is usually best experienced by playing the default way, the default factions, but I'll show you how you can change that if you wanted to do something different. These next settings are important. You need to pick them now. So, if you wanted certain things off or the super carrier on, this slider is probably the most important. Slide it down to 30 minutes. And this is talking about the time on target that the AI uses. So not only does your mission planner, but the enemy mission planner set time on targets. By setting it to 30 minutes, in my testing, most of the time on targets will be under an hour. And for me, about an hour playtime is the best. So the last plane on target shouldn't be any more than 60 minutes if you put this setting down like this. These are all the supported mods. And if you want those in, you got to install them on your end, but then this enables them to work with Liberation. Player income, usually best to leave this alone unless you notice that your campaign, you need to boost some money up to help things out. If you want everything automated, this is the way to go. If you're not the type of person that wants to do any planning, this is how it's done. I'm going to keep these off. Now we're through that, we're going to finish the campaign. And it's going to generate it. Now this is the place where you can mess with the squadrons. This is also set up by default by the mission designer. Now if you pick a different faction, it's going to automatically pull similar planes as much as possible to match it. But if you don't like it, you can hit add. And let's say you needed somebody to fly something different. You could put them in a UH-60. Pick the base, and there you go. Now you have that available to you. And to delete it, you just hit remove. These tasking options, they're pretty straightforward. They're usually automatically set, and they're usually just fine. And you can switch out the red forces, give them more, give them less. This is the only opportunity you have to make your squadron. Once you're done, all you have to do is hit the X, and it'll generate with all those settings. The first thing you should do once the campaign loads in, you need to come up here to these gear icons and click settings. You need to go through this carefully. This is gonna, you can change these at will, but this is gonna dictate how your campaign plays out. Uh, you got the skill levels, which is pretty obvious. You can change the income multipliers. The player pilot cannot be killed. So in this version, squadrons do have actual pilots, and you can set it up where the pilots can die, and there's limitations. So this is why this is here. It's kind of easy mode. So if you get shot down, you don't lose your pilot. Man pads on front lines is pretty straightforward. I usually take that off because the AI is not the best. And by AI, I mean friendly forces doing CAS. They'll just get shot down by man pads constantly. If you don't want night missions, you can click that. You got your label options, your map visibility options, external views, easy comms, and battle damage assessment, the little window that pops up and tells you that you got your hit. This is where you can restrict weapons by date if you selected that preset in the beginning. It's a work in progress, so your mileage may vary. In the old versions of Liberation, tankers and AWACS would spawn in the air and be invulnerable. Now you can launch them from air bases and carriers and things like that, so it's not recommended to use these anymore. AI pilot leveling, I turned this off. Pilot level affects the AI skill, so I don't want to accidentally let an AI become super good and just wipe the map. So I turned that off. This is where the squadron pilot limits come in progress into play, and I would use this when I play by myself. It lets you set the max number of pilots per squadron, which means if you got 12 pilots and 16 planes, well, you can only put 12 planes in the air. And then the squadron replenishment rate, this is for when your pilots die. So if you have 12 pilots and you lose 4, well, now you can only put 8 until the next turn, and then you'd get 4 more pilots. This is where the automation preferences come in. I usually do never assign player pilots because I want to assign my own player pilot packaging. I also, this little sneaky one right here, uncheck this. Manage frontline stances. I like to manage it myself. I like to set that up so I know what my ground units are going to do. And then automatically generate packages players are scheduled ASAP. That's so you don't have to wait. The mission generator, this is something that's new to 6.0 and has been in the preview builds for a while. This has to do with the timeline. So when the aircraft are taking off, flying around, and they would get in first contact with each other, meaning that combat needs to happen, the mission pauses and creates the mission file. Part of that is you could tell it also to interrupt fast forward for player packages. You can have it at startup time, so you always get to start up your plane, at taxi time when it's time to move, or at takeoff time. So those are options if you don't like to sit there and do cold starts and taxi and all of that. I usually always have it set to startup time. Auto resolve combat during fast forward. This is a work in progress option that if you want to use the timeline and don't want to have first contact, the AI can auto resolve. It's very casualty heavy, and I don't use it for that reason. And I don't know if I would ever use it in the current state. Maybe if it turned into like a Falcon BMS thing where it's just a constant non-turn based, you kind of have to. This is where you can set the super carrier module on and off. You can have the objective markers that are put on the map, a dark knee board. I always check this one. Player flights ignore time on target and spawn immediately. Reason I do that is if you accidentally have a time on target that's late, you're not going to be able to fly until that time on target's spawn point. So if it's 50 minutes into the mission, you're gonna have to wait until it's feasible for you to get in that plane and go to it. Default start type for AI aircraft should be cold. Uh, you need to make sure if you set these other options that you could have some conflicts and issues there. Desired mission duration is 30 minutes, like we said before, but you can change it if you forget. You got the smoke, you got the artillery strikes, moving ground units. Convoy drives the full distance between control points. This is important. Right now, there's kind of a bug that this has to be on, otherwise, it'll throw an error. It may not happen all the time, but what this is saying is the convoy, when you buy a unit from a factory, it's got to drive from that factory to the front lines. Now, if you're at a base with a factory and the front lines are right there, then that doesn't have to happen. It only is if there's a base without a front line. I mean, without a factory. So just leave this on for now. Infantry squad alongside vehicles. I don't like it. I don't care. I don't need more AI on the ground. Generate carcasses for units short in previous turns. Don't like it. Turn it off. I've had issues where I might blow up something that's in an inconvenient spot. I don't know if that's all ironed out, but let's say you blew up a vehicle on a taxiway and now there's a carcass there the whole time. I don't know if that's possible in the current builds of Liberation because I don't use it. Calling of distant units. If you're playing a big map and you want to call the other units that are outside the play area, that means that they won't spawn in and won't be a resource hog. Now, calling you usually can display with either things on the right here or this little box here. In this point in a 6.0 preview, you can't see the call zones to my knowledge. I personally don't have an issue with calling, and then my group uses a dedicated server as well. So obviously, you don't want to call any SAM sites that are going to be in use or anything that's near the carrier. So that's what those options are for. Cheat menu. Cheat menu does come in handy. You can do the frontline cheat, with let you move the front line forward. So after you capture a base, a lot of times the front line will be right on the base, and that can lead to some weird things. So I usually always use the cheat to push it forward just once more. Same thing with base capture. Let's say you've been working hard to capture a base and you got some units on the field or in the area, and for some reason there's a red unit that's just keeping it from capturing. You can cheat and capture the base because you don't want to do a sortie for one ground unit. The plugins, JTAC Autolays. This is an automatic JTAC. Automatically does laser, automatically does smoke. You don't talk to it, it just automatically does everything. This is common in multiplayer servers. Skynet, you can read more about it on the GitHub page. Basically, all the radars will talk to each other and they'll shut off their radars. They'll be smart about things. Really fun to play with players. The AI doesn't, the AI planes don't know how to handle it very well. So if you're sending seed flights and the enemy shuts their radar off, the AI don't really know what to do at that point. So I would shut it off if you're using just AI and solo, but I would turn it on if you have some people with you. EWRS, it acts like an early warning radar system. It pops up in the top right corner in text. It'll give you bearing distance and all of that to the enemy aircraft. Uh, Cargo script for the C-130. Splash damage, highly recommend. Fixes the splash damage in DCS in most cases. So if you drop a big bomb in a group of planes on the runway, it's going to blow them all up. Plugin options. This is for the JTEC Autolays. Big red smoke might be a little too easy for you, so you can turn that off. Flaming Cliffs 3 laser codes. This is for the FC3 plane. You can turn that on if you want. Skynet options. Just keep all these default. Same thing with the ATC export. This is an external program that I have no knowledge of how to use. And that's everything for setting this up. So now you're ready to play. So how do you play? How do you go about things? Well, you have to buy units first before hitting begin campaign, or you'll start with nothing. So Tanapa's on the front, and it says right here that this airport can hold 68 aircraft. We can deploy 27 ground units at a time. How many ground units we have with the runways optional and the ammo depots. So the ammo depots on runways lead to the amount of ground units deployable. So if they blow this up or you blow them up on an enemy airfield, this number goes down. And the thing to remember about ammo depots, factories, any money making objects, once they're blown up, there's no way to repair them. And this one says it doesn't have a factory. So this is what I was talking about with convoys driving full distance. The convoys are going to have to drive from this area that has a factory. If we click on it, it says factory can produce ground units. So you don't buy the ground units here, you buy them up here. And because of DCS and AI, you can buy a bunch of variety of units, but tanks are obviously the best killing machines on the ground. So we're gonna buy 10 tanks, and we've got different options. Now you can find this on the GitHub wiki on what these do. Just a quick rundown: defensive, your tanks are stationary in defensive positions. Aggressive, they'll push forward. Retreat, they'll fall back and make the front line fall back if they fall back far enough. Breakthrough, this is what you use to break through and get to the enemy airbase. So when you're in within a good distance of the airbase, set them to breakthrough and they'll just punch through the enemy line and try to get on the field. Elimination sets them to attack the nearest groups. This is really good if you don't want to do casts and you just want your tanks to seek out the nearest enemy units. They'll do that. And ambush is kind of like defensive, but they set up in, I guess, better positions to attack the enemy. The ones that I use the most are defensive, breakthrough, and elimination. So because it's going to be the front line the first time, I'm going to buy a couple extra tanks and we're going to do elimination. We're also going to need some aircraft. So let's see what we got back here. We're going to need an AWACS and we're going to need some AI cap. And I find that the AI F-15s do the job pretty good. We're going to need some other things. I don't really need a tanker. I'm not going to be using the tanker, and the AI don't do well with tankers anyway. Going to come up here, and we're going to get ourselves some CAS aircraft. And we're going to get a bunch of 16s, because who doesn't love the 16? And we'll get a few Hornets. And we're looking good. We actually could probably buy a few more of these tanks. Now that we got the ground units built, we can take a look at these other buildings. So anything with this symbol is a SAM site. And you can sell these units. You can disband them, or you can buy and replace. Let's say we want to replace it with a Patriot. It would cost us 276 million. And you can change some of this. Like you could put linebackers in here. You could get less. So you could play around with that a little bit. Right now, we're going to leave everything default. Stuff like these is money making objects, and you click on it, it tells you how much money it's giving you. Once again, these kind of buildings, if they get destroyed by the enemy or by you, you're not making money off of them. Scroll in here. We got some tanks defending the airbase. Uh, we could probably sell these off, disband, and we'd get money because the likelihood of the AI making it back here, not likely, but we'll leave a couple just for demonstration purposes. So we got these, we got some workshops back here, and just some more buildings and such. So you want to protect your factories, and you want to take out the enemy units. The first order of business is you need air superiority, and you need to kill SAM sites and get your ground units up there. So we bought a bunch of stuff. We do still have money left, but we don't need to spend it right off the bat. I'm going to hit begin campaign, and the auto generator is going to make us a bunch of missions. Okay. And this is what I was talking about by setting your timer to 30 minutes. The longest flight in our plan is time on target in 1 hour. Now we can change that. We could set it to ASAP. Now it's 30 minutes. What we also could do is we can edit these flights. Let's say you're not the type that likes to do mission planning. So you just want to pick something the AI made. You just come in here, double click on this, and you can select the name of the pilot that you want and check them as a player pilot. You can set your start options. It's usually best just to leave this as is. Your payload. You can obviously change your payload in Sim through the loadout manager, but you could do it here too. And your waypoints. You can add waypoints and stuff like that, but I do caution that sometimes if you add waypoints that aren't automatically created, it'll break the timeline system. So just keep that in mind. I don't edit the waypoints anymore. So now we got a player slot, and just for the heck of it, we're gonna ASAP all the rest of these. I'm not gonna play this out, but I'm just showing you that you can do this. And we could play like that. Okay, we could just completely do that. But what I normally do is I come in here and I cancel all these out. And I like to do it myself. So I'll right click Tonapa, I'll pick the AWACS, hit save. We got to have front lines, so right click the front lines, cast, send a couple A10s. Well, we don't want the A10s to go out there and die by themselves. So we can do this a couple ways. We can tell them to take off later, and then we could have a TARCAP flight that gets out there quicker. So that's an option. Or you can pair them together. You can go A10C and TARCAP, and now they'll sync up together. And you could change this out if you wanted it to go later. So those are two different ways that you can mess around with things to get your packages in order. And then, so we got the packages. We'll delete these two. So we got CAS. Something else that we need to look at is more air support. But I want to show you something. When you click on this for the TARCAP, this is the racetrack circle. Anything inside the circle, they're going to try to engage. Groom Lake has aircraft on the ground. So that means that the AI get an opportunity, they're going to strafe this runway for those aircraft. They don't care if there's AAA, they don't care if there's SAMs, they don't care if there's other aircraft. They will die strafing this runway. So you absolutely have to fine tune the racetrack. And the way you do that is you find the start and the end point. And what I do is I make sure that they are not on the runway. So you see how the racetrack changes as I move this? Can also make it smaller. Okay. So what I would normally do in my case when I make missions is I do CAS and then I'll do the tar cap separately. Or personally, I would just do a bar cap flight. That's, I mean, accomplish the same goal for me. And I use combined arms to get that set up the way I wanted. And another thing that I do is start and end. So if I do another bar cap, I reverse it. So the starts here. So I'll put the start here and the end here. And that way they're doing racetracks in the opposite direction and more chance that they're spread out to engage targets. So we got some bar cap, we got some front lines going on, and then you can plan out strike like this SA-11. This has got to go. Strike packages give a waypoint for every object. Now you are sending F-18s to come out here by themselves. Yes, you can add more to it. What you could do is set up a seat escort with F-18s. Now those guys will make sure to defend against SAM sites for that package. If you do just a normal escort, the enemy AI that's escorting is limited, so it'll fly out to the waypoint over the SAM site and get shot. The next best thing that you could do is a fighter sweep. Okay. And now you got that package done. And they'll all sync up and they'll all fly out together. Now, I run a group called Rerun Liberation. So a lot of the times we're not even using AI. And I'm going to show you what that looks like real quick after I teach you how to do transfers. So this button up here is the air wing. And to transfer units, let's say you want to transfer from Tonopah to the test range, you come up here and it tells you underneath where they all are. So let's say these F-15s, we want to move them to the test range. Okay, so we clicked on that. You don't see any packages, you don't see any confirmation, but I assure you that next turn they will be there. Now we got this group of F-15s. Let's find them. They're right here. If we were to move them to the test range, since they have aircraft, they're going to fly them. Now, if you were to play the mission, they'd do a ferry flight, or you could just pass turn and then they'll move. So in this case, we're going to pass turn just to show you what it looks like. And every time you pass turn, it's going to redo the budget. So you're going to get paid. So will the enemy. And now we can see that we'll have the F-15s here, the E's and the C's. So that's quick about transfers. Now, if you're transferring ground units, you can do that through this screen. So if we accidentally bought some units back here, we could hit transfer and it would create a transfer order. Okay, what typical player night looks like is I'll put the AWACS up, do a bunch of bar cap because my guys that I play with, we do a lot of strikes. So we don't do cap, we can self defend, but obviously we don't want to worry about that. And let me see if I can create this. So you notice how it says missing 4 pilots? That's because the squadron only has 12 pilots. Now, if you didn't want to do that, you can come back in here and do per squadron pilot limit work in progress. Cancel that flight, and now if we make it, it should say we're good to go. Yep. So that's an option. So a bunch of bar caps, so people with combined arms can tell their guys to come help out. And then the packages. So of course, let's say we're gonna have a couple guys do CAS. Well, you can put their name in there. You know, you can put the name of their call sign so they know what flight they are. You also need, what I do is I always scroll up, and that way I have all the player pilots at the top of the list and hit create. And then we're going to do 5959. And this will make a lot more sense in a minute with the timeline and at first contact. Let's say we're going to send a couple guys out here in 18s to do the strike. Pick the top 2 names. You see that this one, remember that it was a player. That's the reason why I do that. Uncheck that, 5959. And the reason we use strike for everything is because it gives you a waypoint. And so if we go in here to the waypoints, it shows you every piece of object that you have to shoot. So it doesn't matter if you're doing seed or deed or whatever, use strike because it gives you the waypoints for everything. And we're going to take out this SA6. Let's say we got a couple 16 pilots. Player. And we have so many SAMs. So realistically, I'd probably be trying to get enough guys to go after these targets. Clear that out on the front line first. And I'm not going to give them any kind of escorts or nothing because they can call the F-15s to come help them. Okay. So we got some packages up, Everybody knows what their job is. And look, I accidentally didn't make these player flights. So I can double click, and then I can go up to the top here, hit player, player, and close this out. And now we're fixed. So that would be like a typical mission. Okay. The reason we're doing 5959 is because we want it to start at first contact. We also have it start at startup time. So with 5959, the startup time isn't till 22 minutes into the mission, which means if the bar cap didn't get in contact, we wouldn't have to start up till 22 minutes into the mission. The reason you want to go farther into the mission is because the AI aren't taxiing, they're already in the air, the enemy has assets in the air, everything's just moving faster, and you can get sorties done quicker. Because right now in 5.2, you still have to wait at the beginning of the mission 10, 15 minutes for the AI to taxi and take off. And if I don't think the enemy is going to be on the front lines very quick, what I'll do is I'll stagger these guys. We'll put them like 20 minutes, 22 minutes, 25 minutes, and you got to think about their fuel too. So we're trying to end this. It's going to start at 1200 local. We're trying to end it at 1300. So we got these set to 20, 30. That's good. All the time on targets is set to 59. Great. So what you want to do is you're going to come in here. You're going to want to save it. Save, test. That way you're good to go. Make it a habit of saving every single time. If you don't like the weather, you can quickly change that in the editor. You can't do it here. Same thing with the time. You can change the time. But what we're going to do is hit takeoff. It's going to generate. It's going to take some time. It's a little slow once in a while. Doing all its calculations. Now look, 12:22. We are going to start 22 minutes into the mission, and by 1300, all the time on targets are over for the enemy. So you fly all the way up to 1300, you do your strikes, you come back, or in the case of our group, we go, hey, you guys got, it's 1300, you got 10 minutes to RTB if you haven't already. And then we shut the server down. You can manually submit the files here. If you made a mistake, you can hit abort. But the thing about hitting abort is the time stays the same. Okay? That's why you saved it. Okay? You can go back to save or your temp save. Now we're back at 1200 local. Let's say we don't need that flight. Okay, we're good to go. Now we can take off again. Something else that we're going to go over real quick is the files for factions. So DCS Liberation resources, you got campaigns, you've got factions. Some other ones we're not going to go over is layouts and groups. That's how certain things are decided what groups are going to be. But this is what a faction looks like. So Copa made the generic Blue 4 faction. It uses all these aircraft. These are the front line units. Okay. So personally, we did something a little different. We made our own factions for our group because we wanted everybody to have something to fly, like the Vigans and the Mirage and the K50 and the JF-17. So we made our own custom faction. It's really easy to do. All you got to do is pick a couple of the ones that are already pre-made and edit it the way you want it to. And then you throw it into resources. So that's pretty straightforward. And then over here, so we're playing that exercise Vegas nerve, and this is how certain things are defined. So you have that edit screen for the squadrons, but the campaign designer puts this in there. And so he knows where he wants the certain things to fly, to start with, what squadrons. And technically, you don't need to put anything anywhere. So if you didn't want any of these at Groom Lake, you don't have to. It can be empty. It's just defining the squadrons. The enemy will move their aircraft around throughout the campaign. You can also see this is where we set the performance, the start date, what version it's on. And it's pretty straightforward stuff. If you're ever curious about messing around with it, you can do that. take a look at my notes real quick. Let's see if I missed anything. That's pretty much it. So all you got to do is at this point take off, fly your mission, enjoy it. You don't have to go back and land either. Okay, so let's say you've been flying, it was a hard mission, you're on your way to RTB, you're flying back, and you're good to go. You're happy. You can disconnect. As long as you don't crash and let DCS register your losses, you can actually kind of cheat that way too. Like if you're about to get your ass kicked, you could just quit the match and it saves the file right there as it is. Not recommended though. Now the timeline can be done manually. Okay, and I'll show you how that looks. So you can click on this button, and then instead of starting at first contact, the timer starts going. You know, notice all the timers. Gonna go to 100x, and you'll start to see planes take off, little symbols. We'll wait. Oh, there's the AWACS. There's some enemy planes taking off. There they go. And it will stop at first contact on its own, as long as you don't have the work in progress uh, combat turned on. So as long as you don't have the auto resolve turned on, it'll stop. It'll also stop based on what you did set. So I mean, at startup time, that's how I have it set. Now, what we can do, just for the hell of it, we'll load our temp save. I'll come over here. I'll never no fast forward, auto resolve combat, and we'll just let it play really fast. So we'll do 1000x. And even though these are player slots, it'll keep going. It'll put them in the air. It'll do their thing. So there's planes going, still doing their thing. We're 22 minutes. It's still going. You can see that the combat's starting to happen. See, he got taken out. You got the seed flights. Got all of these flights going up. Combat's happening. Although, look at that. In an instant, all those planes are dead. Bunch of their flights are dead. Those flights are trying to get there to do their thing. And so technically you can play the whole match. But you do have to, we're already at 1300. Okay. You do have to take off and generate the mission and do something. So you can't just play this like this. I hope all of this helps out in the future. This is all I've got for you today. Hopefully we'll see some of you join our group. We really enjoy having new pilots, people that are wanting to learn and do things. It's a lot of fun.